Welcome to your deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at something pretty visual. We're talking biomes.
Yeah.
You know, these like distinct regions on Earth with their own unique plants and animals.
hmm
And the really fun part is we're going to be looking at them through these things called climatographs.
Yeah, it's like a cheat sheet to understanding a whole region.
Okay, so back up for a sec.
Yeah.
What exactly is a climatograph?
So picture a graph, right? At the bottom, you've got the months of the year all laid out. And then on one side, you've got a line. It's showing how the temperature changes throughout the year. And then on the other side, you've got these bars. They show the rainfall for each month.
So it's like instead of having to go through tons and tons of weather data, you can just glance at this one graph and get like a snapshot of a place's climate.
Exactly.
Wow. So for this deep dive, we've got sources on 6 major biomes: grasslands, deserts, tundras, taigas, deciduous forests, and rainforests. And we're going to be like unlocking all their secrets through climatographs. So where do we even begin?
Well, first, we got to make sure we know how to read these graphs. So remember that temperature line we talked about? Anything above 25 degrees Celsius, we consider that a high monthly temperature.
Okay, so 25 degrees Celsius. That's like our benchmark for a hot month.
Yeah.
What about the opposite? What about like those freezing temperatures?
Yeah, so anything below 0 degrees Celsius, that's considered a low temperature.
Okay, so we've got our highs and lows for temperature. Now, what about rainfall? How do we tell if a place is like a super soggy swamp or a dry desert just from the climatograph?
Well, we consider anything above 150 millimeters of rainfall in a month to be high, and then anything below 50 millimeters, we consider that low.
Okay, so we've got those thresholds.
Yeah.
Highs and lows for both temperature and rainfall.
Yeah.
But wait a second. Isn't there a catch? Something about hemispheres.
Oh, yeah. You got to pay attention to which hemisphere the climatograph represents.
Oh, right. Because like in Australia, their summer is our winter.
Exactly. So you're not just looking at the numbers on the graph. You're also thinking about what time of year it is in that specific location.
Okay. So it's like a puzzle. We're going to combine the clues from the graph with what we know about geography.
Cool. You got it ready to start exploring some of those biomes.
Yeah, let's dive in. Okay, first up, grasslands. I'm picturing like wide open spaces, swaying grasses, a few scattered trees, maybe something like the African savanna or the Great Plains in North America.
Perfect. Now, if you were to look at a climatograph for a grassland, you'd see some pretty distinct patterns. First, grasslands are located in these temperate zones. So unlike rainforests, they actually experience seasons.
So we're going to see some variation in that temperature line. It's not just a straight line across.
Right. The temperature usually stays above freezing, even in the colder months. But you'll notice a dip during the winter.
Okay, so they have winters, but they're not like super brutal and cold.
Yeah.
What about rainfall?
Now, that's where things get interesting. Grasslands get enough rain to support all that grass, but you'll see a noticeable decrease in precipitation during the winter months. Some grasslands even have a dry season, where fires are actually really important for the ecosystem.
Wait, fires are a good thing.
Yeah, they might seem counterintuitive, but fires are a natural part of many grassland ecosystems. They help clear out the dead vegetation, and that allows new growth to come in. Plus, some grassland plants have actually adapted to thrive in those fire-prone environments. They might have deep roots that can survive the flames, or seeds that actually need the heat of a fire to germinate.
Wow, that is so cool. So it's not just the amount of rain, but also the timing?
Yeah.
And even the presence of fire that kind of shapes a grassland.
Exactly, it's all interconnected.
Okay, so grasslands are a lot more dynamic than I initially thought. What's next?
Let's go to a land of extremes deserts. And to be clear, we're talking about the hot deserts near the equator, not the Arctic deserts, which are actually a type of tundra.
Okay, hot deserts. So I'm thinking scorching sun, endless sand dunes, maybe a lone cactus just breathing the heat. But wait, if deserts are so dry, how does anything survive out there?
That's a great question. And that's where the climatograph comes in handy. The main thing that defines a desert climatograph is low precipitation throughout the whole year. They're super dry. But those plants and animals you mentioned, they've evolved some pretty incredible ways to cope with those conditions.
So it's not just the absence of rain, but also how life has adapted to thrive in these seemingly impossible environments.
Right, like desert plants. Some have deep root systems that can tap into those underground water sources, and others have developed ways to actually store water in their leaves or stems. Think of a cactus and its amazing water storage capabilities.
That's incredible. So even in like the driest places, life finds a way. What about the temperature though? Given that they're close to the equator, I imagine it's pretty hot all year round.
You got it. The temperature line on a desert climatograph stays pretty high, because of that equatorial location. Not much variation throughout the year.
So unlike grasslands with their distinct seasons, deserts are all about consistency, at least when it comes to heat. Okay, so we've explored the climatographs of grasslands and deserts. Now,
Let's head to the opposite end of the temperature spectrum. The tundra. Think vast, icy plains, low-growing vegetation, and animals like polar bears and Arctic foxes.
it's getting chilly in here.
Mm.
But wait, don't tundras have those crazy long periods of daylight and darkness because of the Earth's tilt? Wouldn't that cause some extreme temperature swings?
Exactly. Tundras are located at the poles, so they experience some of the most extreme seasonal variations on Earth.
Okay, so we're definitely going to see some dramatic dips and peaks on that temperature line. But what about rainfall? Are tundras as dry as deserts?
That's something they do have in common. Low precipitation. You'll see very little rainfall on a tundra climatograph, although there might be a slight increase during their very short summer.
Right, because it's so cold. So we've got these super short summers and then these long, dark winters where temperatures just plummet. What kind of impact does that have on the environment?
Well, one of the defining features of the tundra is something called permafrost. It's this layer of soil that stays frozen all year round. It's like a giant frozen sponge, and it stores massive amounts of carbon.
Frozen carbon. What's that all about?
So as plants and animals die in the tundra, they decompose really slowly because of the cold, and their remains get trapped in that permafrost, locking away the carbon they contain.
Oh, okay. So the tundra is like a giant carbon storage unit.
Exactly. But here's the thing. As global temperatures rise, permafrost is starting to thaw in some areas.
Uh-oh. So what happens when it thaws?
That's when things get complicated. As the permafrost thaws, microbes start to decompose that organic matter that was frozen, and that releases carbon dioxide and methane, which are greenhouse gases, into the atmosphere.
So thawing permafrost contributes to climate change.
It's a complex issue, but yes, thawing permafrost is a big concern because it could potentially speed up global warming. It's a prime example of how interconnected everything is on our planet.
Wow, that's a lot to think about. Okay, so we've explored grasslands, deserts, and now the tundra, each with their unique climatographs. What other biome awaits?
How about another forest ecosystem, the taiga, also known as the boreal forest?
All right, so I'm imagining these vast expanses of coniferous trees, those evergreen giants that don't lose their leaves, like towering pines and spruce trees, maybe a moose wandering through.
Perfect picture. Now, taigas are found in temperate regions, but they tend to be colder than deciduous forests, which we'll talk about later. On a taiga climatograph, you'll see variable precipitation with a noticeable increase during the summer months.
Why is there more rain in the summer? What's going on there?
Well, it's a couple things. First, warmer temperatures lead to more evaporation. So there's more moisture in the air to form clouds and eventually precipitation. And second, those big weather systems, they tend to shift northward during the summer, bringing moisture from the oceans inland.
So it's a combo of warmer temps and shifting weather patterns that bring those summer rains. Makes sense. So what about the rest of the year?
Taiga winters are no joke. The temperature dips below freezing for a good chunk of the year. But those coniferous trees are tough. They've adapted to survive.
How do they do it? Those needles don't look very warm.
They have their tricks. First, those needle-like leaves have a much smaller surface area than broadleaves, so they lose less water. Plus, they're coated in a waxy substance that helps prevent freezing.
It's like they have their own tiny winter coats. Clever. Okay, so now we've covered 4 biomes: grasslands, deserts, the tundra, and the taiga. I'm starting to see how these climatographs tell a story about a place.
Definitely. Those numbers tell us a lot about how the plants and animals have adapted to live in these different biomes.
It's like each climatograph is a window into a whole different world.
And that world is even more interesting when you think about how no 2 biomes are exactly alike. Even within a biome, there can be variations depending on things like altitude, soil type, and how close it is to the ocean.
So it's not just about those broad categories, but also about all those little differences that make each place unique.
You got it ready to explore another one.
Absolutely.
What's next?
Let's head to the deciduous forests, those woodlands that are famous for their fall colors. You know, maples, oaks, beech trees. Ah, yes, the classic fall foliage. But don't deciduous forests have a dry season too?
Good question. It's actually a bit of a misconception that they're constantly wet. While they get a lot of rain overall, some deciduous forests do experience periods of lower rainfall, but it's not like the prolonged dry season you might see in a grassland or a desert.
Got it. So more like subtle shifts in rainfall rather than a complete shutdown. Okay, back to deciduous forests. Where do they fit in on the temperature and precipitation scale?
They're also in those temperate regions, so they experience 4 distinct seasons. Just like grasslands and taigas, Their precipitation can fluctuate quite a bit throughout the year. You might see high rainfall in some months and lower in others.
It's a bit more unpredictable.
Yeah, but there's often an increase in precipitation during the summer months, which provides all that moisture those trees need.
Plenty of moisture to support those lush forests, but not as consistently wet as a rainforest. What about the temperature range?
On a deciduous forest climatograph, you'll see a clear peak in the summer, often reaching around 25 degrees Celsius, sometimes even higher.
Ah, so those warm summer months are what allow those trees to really flourish. But then things cool down in the fall, and those leaves change color before dropping for winter. It's like the trees are responding to the climatograph.
Exactly. The changing seasons show up in both the temperature and the precipitation patterns, and those patterns have a direct impact on the plants and animals in the forest.
This is amazing. We've explored 5 biomes now: grasslands, deserts, the tundra, the taiga, and deciduous forests. I feel like I'm getting a real sense of how these climatographs reveal so much.
They really do. It's like they unlock the secrets of these different ecosystems.
Totally. And I bet our last stop is going to be pretty spectacular.
Oh, you bet. We're heading to the rainforest, one of the most biodiverse places on Earth.
All right, I'm picturing towering trees covered in vines, colorful birds, maybe a jaguar prowling around.
Yeah.
What do rainforest climatographs look like?
Think warmth and lots of moisture. Rainforests are found in tropical zones, so they experience high precipitation and high temperatures all year round.
So the opposite of the desert. Constant rain and warmth. That explains why they're so lush and full of life. But what else makes them so special?
You're right. It's not just the climate. It's also about the incredible diversity of life that thrives in those conditions. Rainforests are home to about half of all plant and animal species on Earth, even though they only cover a small part of the planet's surface.
Wow, that's unbelievable. So it's not just about the quantity of life, but also the sheer variety of species.
Yeah.
What makes rainforests such biodiversity hotspots?
It's a lot of things, but the constant warmth and moisture are definitely key. Imagine a warm, humid environment where it rains almost every day. Plants can grow year-round, and all that plant life provides food and shelter for tons of animals. Plus, the rainforest has all these layers, from the forest floor to the canopy. It creates all these different habitats.
Like a giant living apartment building with different species living on each floor. That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've journeyed from scorching deserts to the icy tundra and now to the lush rainforests. All through these climatographs. It's incredible how much they tell us about the different biomes of our planet.
It really is like a secret decoder ring for understanding the natural world.
And we're not done yet. We've got a lot more to unpack in part 2 of this deep dive.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into biomes and climatographs. It's amazing how those rainforests can support so much life.
Yeah, it really shows how everything's connected on our planet, from the tiniest bug to the biggest tree. It's all part of this balance shaped by climate geography and even evolution.
Right? And we've seen how these climatographs can help us see those connections in a way that's like both visual and packed with info.
Yeah, it's like having this key that unlocks the secrets of different biomes.
Okay, so before we dive into anything new, let's do a quick recap of the climatographs we've seen so far. Just a little refresher before we move on.
Sounds good. Let's start with those temperate grasslands. What stood out to you about their climatographs?
Well, remember, the temperature line had some variation. It dipped in the winter, but not as much as the tundra. And then there was that thing about precipitation. Enough to support all those grasses, but with less rain during the winter months. It's like the perfect amount. Not too much, not too little.
Yeah, good point. And don't forget about those fires. They're actually important for maintaining that ecosystem.
Right. It's not just how much rain there is, but also the timing. And even those natural disturbances.
Okay.
Okay, now let's switch gears completely and head to the desert. Those climatographs were easy to remember.
Yeah, super straightforward. Low precipitation all year round. And consistently hot temperatures, thanks to their location near the equator.
Yeah, desert's hot and dry. No surprises there.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's cool things down a bit and head to the tundra.
All right, tundra climatographs are the easiest to spot. They have those extremely low average temperatures, often below freezing, especially in the winter. And they're similar to deserts in that they get very little precipitation, but they might see a slight bump during that short summer they get.
Right, so tundra, dry and freezing. The total opposite of the desert. But they both have to deal with not a lot of moisture, whether it's a cactus storing water or tundra plants growing low to the ground. Okay, how about those taigas, those super tall evergreen trees?
Taigas are cool because their precipitation changes quite a bit throughout the year, but usually you'll see more rain during those warm summer months. That's because of those shifting weather patterns and the increase in evaporation. And their winters are cold. Temperatures drop below freezing pretty regularly.
Taiga winters are no joke, but not quite as harsh as the tundra. And those coniferous trees have their own ways of dealing with the cold, like those waxy needles and smaller leaves to prevent water loss. Okay, we're on a roll here. How about those deciduous forests, the ones we see with all the colorful leaves in the fall?
Deciduous forests can be a bit tricky to figure out just from their climatographs, because their precipitation can really change throughout the year. Lots of rain in some months, less in others, but there's usually a peak in the summer, and of course the temperature goes up in the summer too. That's what helps those trees grow.
Right. So deciduous forests have those four distinct seasons, and the temperature and precipitation patterns show those changes. The trees lose their leaves in the fall to save water and energy, then come back to life in the spring when it's warmer and the rain returns.
Exactly. It's like the trees are in sync with the seasons.
And finally, we have the rainforests, those biodiversity hotspots.
Rainforest climatographs are pretty simple. High temperatures and high precipitation all year long. It's that combination that creates those lush and diverse ecosystems. So many different forms of life can thrive there.
I'm still blown away by the fact that rainforests have almost half of all plant and animal species on Earth, but they cover such a small part of the planet.
Yeah, it's incredible, and it shows us how important it is to protect these ecosystems. They're not just pretty, they're also super important for the planet. They help regulate our climate, give us oxygen, and support tons of species.
Okay, that was a really good recap.
Yeah.
I feel like I've got a good understanding of these 6 main biomes and what their climatographs look like, but I'm curious, are there other biomes out there that we haven't talked about?
Oh yeah, tons. We've only just scratched the surface. There are things like temperate rainforests. They're like a mix of deciduous forests and tropical rainforests. They have 4 seasons, but with way more rain than a typical deciduous forest. And then there are montane forests. They're found in mountainous regions. So they experience a huge range of temperatures and precipitation depending on the altitude.
So even within those main categories of biomes, there's even more variation and specialization. It's like nature is always coming up with new ways to adapt.
That's exactly what makes studying biomes so interesting. There's always something new to learn about how life survives in different parts of our planet.
This deep dive is already mind-blowing.
Right.
Before we get too sidetracked with all these other awesome biomes, I want to go back to something you said earlier about climatographs being like a key to understanding these ecosystems. Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure, remember those thresholds for high and low temperatures and precipitation? We talked about those numbers a lot. Well, those aren't just random numbers. They actually reflect the limits of what most plants and animals can handle.
Okay, I see what you mean. So if I'm looking at a climatograph and I see really high temperatures and very little rain, it's probably a desert.
Yeah.
And that means the plants and animals that live there have had to evolve in specific ways to survive in that environment.
Exactly, and you can do that with any biome. If you see a climatograph that dips below freezing in the winter and has a medium amount of rain, you're probably looking at a temperate forest.
It's like we're climate detectives, using the graphs to solve the mysteries of the natural world.
That's a great way to think about it.
Okay, I'm loving this climatograph detective work. But before we go full Sherlock Holmes, I have another question. You said that no two biomes are exactly alike, even within the same category. What causes that variation?
That's a great question. It's what makes studying biomes so complex and fascinating. Climate is a big factor, but it's not the only one. Soil type, altitude, whether it's near the ocean or not. And even human activity can all change the characteristics of a biome.
Okay, let's break those down one by one. Starting with soil. How does soil type affect a biome?
Well, different soils have different properties, like texture, drainage, and nutrient content. For example, sandy soils drain really quickly, but clay soils hold onto moisture. Those differences can change what types of plants can grow in an area.
So even if two places have similar climates, they could have totally different plants depending on the soil. That makes sense? What about altitude? How does that play a role?
As you go higher up a mountain, it usually gets colder. And the precipitation patterns change too. Think about climbing a mountain. You might start in a forest, but as you climb, the trees get smaller and there are fewer of them. Then you might end up in a meadow or even just bare rock at the very top.
It's like traveling through different biomes as you climb.
Yeah.
And what about being near the ocean? How does that affect things?
Oceans can actually make temperatures more mild.
Yeah.
So coastal areas usually have more moderate climates than places inland that are at the same latitude. Plus, ocean currents can move warm or cold water around, and that can affect both temperature and how much rain a place gets. Like the Gulf Stream brings warm water from the tropics up the east coast of North America, And that's why the climate there is milder than you might expect.
Even though we can group biomes together based on climate, there are always local factors that make each place unique.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's the impact of human activity.
Right, humans have changed the landscape so much. Cutting down forests for farming, building cities, bringing in invasive species. How does that affect how we think about biomes?
It's a challenge, but we can't ignore it. Sometimes human activity has changed biomes so much that they're now considered completely new ecosystems. They're so different from their original state.
So it's not just about pristine, untouched nature, but also about how humans have become a force of nature ourselves, changing the world around us.
Exactly. And that brings us to another important point. It's not just about knowing what biomes are and how to categorize them. It's also about understanding how important they are and what threats they face.
Okay, let's talk about why biomes matter and what we can do to protect them. We've come a long way exploring these biomes and their climatographs. It's amazing how much we can learn from just temperature and rainfall patterns.
It really is those simple graphs. They tell us so much about the climate and how life is adapted and how everything's connected on the planet.
Yeah, but like you said at the end of the last part, it's not just about understanding these biomes on their own. It's also about how important they are and the fact that they're facing all these threats, especially with climate change and everything.
Absolutely. We talk about biomes like they're these separate categories, but really they're all part of this giant web of life that covers the whole world. And each one plays a super important role in keeping our planet healthy and balanced.
Okay, so let's talk about why biomes matter. What do they actually do that benefits the whole planet?
One of the big things is their role in regulating the global climate. Like forests, they act as these massive carbon sinks. They pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere through photosynthesis and store it in their wood and leaves and roots.
Right, like those giant air purifiers. And I remember from our tundra talk that permafrost also stores a lot of carbon.
Exactly. So biomes are crucial for helping slow down climate change because they absorb and store all that carbon. But they do even more than that. They also regulate water cycles, help prevent soil erosion, and provide habitats for tons of species.
So it's not just about climate. It's also about the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat.
Exactly. They're the foundation of life on Earth. Unfortunately, though, a lot of biomes are facing some serious threats from human activities.
I was wondering when we'd get to that part. We've been talking about all these incredible ecosystems, but I know it's not all sunshine and rainbows out there. What are some of the biggest threats that biomes are facing?
Well, there are a lot, and the list keeps growing. Habitat loss is a major one. Because of deforestation, agriculture, and urban sprawl, climate change is also a huge problem. It's messing with temperature and rainfall patterns, pushing some species beyond their limits and disrupting those delicate balances we talked about. Pollution, invasive species, and overexploitation of resources are causing problems too.
It's a lot. It can feel overwhelming knowing that so many of these amazing places are in danger. Can we even do anything to help?
We can. It's easy to feel powerless, but even small actions can make a difference, especially when a lot of people do them.
Okay, like what can people do in their everyday lives to protect biomes?
One of the most important things is reducing our carbon footprint. Things like driving less conserving energy at home and thinking about the products we buy.
Right, those little things can add up.
Right.
What else?
Supporting sustainable agriculture and forestry is also important. Look for products that have certifications, and maybe think about eating less meat, because the meat industry has a big impact on the environment.
Okay, so being conscious consumers. What about things people can do in their own communities to help protect the biomes around them?
Definitely. Get involved in local conservation efforts. Volunteer with groups that are restoring habitats, planting trees, or removing invasive species. Learn about the specific challenges facing the biomes in your area.
So get out there, connect with nature, learn about it, and do something to protect it.
Exactly. And remember, it's not just about protecting these places for their own sake. It's about protecting the essential things they provide that we all need to survive.
This has been such an amazing deep dive. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of how complex and important biomes are.
Me too. I'm glad. And I hope you keep exploring and learning about the natural world.
I definitely will. I hope our listeners will too. So to wrap things up, is there anything else you want to share with everyone?
Just remember that we're all connected to this web of life. Everything we do has an impact, good or bad. By understanding and appreciating biomes, we can make better choices that are good for us and for the planet.
That's a great takeaway. And on that note, I think it's time to end this deep dive. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us.
It was my pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. We hope you learned something new about the amazing diversity and importance of biomes, and we hope you'll keep exploring, learning, and taking action to protect the natural world. Until next time, keep diving deep.